Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today we're looking at the Yorkshire class. Now, this comes to us from, I believe it is Memory Beta. Um, Trying to find the Yorkshire. I thought we had it on Daystrom's website, but I did not see it on there. So it's one of the ships that we do have in our D6 Holocron um, grouping of ships here for the Federation. I wanted to hit this one because the ship that I have next, I'm kind of borrowing a little bit from the Yorkshire in order to come up with it, and you'll see why as we get to there on Saturday. So, first, let's get to the Yorkshire and see what we have for the type of ship we have here. Uh, you may remember this one from the Next Generation. We see this is the ship that Scotty was kind of trapped on in the transporter loop. Um, and the Enterprise has had discovered the Yorkshire or the Yorkshire class vessel, whatever the name was, um, on a Dyson sphere. So um, that's originally where we got to see this come from. So the Yorkshire class was a type of armored transport that saw service in the Federation Starfleet during the 24th century. The Star Trek Encyclopedia Ship Recognition Manual, Volume 1, Ships of the Starfleet. The Yorkshire class was designed to enter the atmosphere of a planet and land on the surface. It was equipped with a surprising number of transporters, allowing it to transport large groups quickly. It was not equipped with particularly strong shields, but um, it's somewhat made up for it with its ablative armor. Ship recognition manual, the same one. Uh, so that's what we've got here. Background specifications from the ship recognition manual. Let's see, and there's nothing really listed here. Now this is from Memory Beta, so that's what we've got here. So it's an interesting ship, and we'll get into it for our D6 version of this here. All right, so kind of started off in the wrong spot here, but anyways, uh, getting into the Yorkshire here in our D6 universe. Uh, when looking at it, we see that it is at a starfighter scale, not a capital scale, so there is a slight difference here. Um, most of the ships that we've been seeing so far have been at capital scale. Here we finally have one at a starfighter scale, much like a lot of these shuttles and that we've been getting. Now it is roughly about 19.10 meters long, has a beam of 22.37 meters, and a height of 15.65 meters. Has a mass of 55,000 metric tons and is a size 3 starship. Uh, Skill to be used would be a space transport skill. We do have an autopilot on board at 3D, so it is above our galactic standard. Has a crew of 4, a skeleton crew of 1, can manage to fly the ship, but it does have a plus 10. So if this was, say, for the Modifius um, ships or whatever, you would be looking at like a extra two dice for your difficulty in order to reach your success here. We have passenger capability of 60 with cargo capacity of 6,000 metric tons. We have enough consumables on board for roughly 1 year. Has a standard warp drive of 4, a warp cruise of 4, a maximum warp cruise of 6. Max rated is warp 9 for 12 hours. We do have a nav computer, of course. Maneuverability is a 2D plus 1, so it's just a hair above our standard. Has a space of 9 and an atmospheric flight of 1,150 kilometers per hour. We have a hull of 4D. Now, do keep in mind this is Starfighter scale. So if we were going to equate this down to a capital scale, it would be a 2D plus 2. Has a shields of 1D plus 2. And then when we look at our sensor packet here, Passively, we can scan out to 4 kilometers with a plus 1D plus 1. We can actively scan out to 12 kilometers with a 2D bonus. We can do an active search for 15 kilometers with a 2D plus 2 bonus and a focus of 500 meters with a plus 3D plus 1 bonus added to our search skill. We have a pretty good range here, and the bonuses really aren't all that bad. So, obviously, the scanning computer on board is fairly robust. It's not, it's not that bad. I think it would be pretty much on par with what we would be hoping for with a Federation vessel. So I think this works out pretty well. Okay, so looking at our weapons though, because this is really a transport. It's meant for a small crew. We can transport a bunch of people and kind of go from there. So we do have two Type 10 phasers. We have 360 degrees forward, 360 degrees aft coverage here. So this is going to be phaser arrays, not just phaser emitters. So crew of one, standard here. Starfighter scale. Fire control is a 0D plus 2. Has a fire rate of 1, so it doesn't have a great fire rate, but it is able to do 10D damage. Now, this is what D6 Holocron has got listed. Now, I'm going to point this out here. Um, we have a slight discrepancy in some of this here for the damage. Because looking up on some of the other ships that have Type 10 phaser arrays, and they're at capital scale, I think they were doing 60 damage, maybe somewhere in that neighborhood. So we're actually a little extra on damage here for this in comparison to what we were doing before. Um, and depending on how you want to do that, you might say, we need to change this and make this down to like an 8D damage, or you might want to leave it and up the damage on the capital skill side of the other starships that are whatever. I think what we really need to do is we really need to start, as we're going through here, start figuring out what our standard type, whatever phaser array, probably going to a type 1 phaser, say phaser bank, phaser array, and say this is how much damage it's going to do, and start moving up from there. I think we may have to recalculate some of this stuff, and if I start doing this, I'll let you know what I'm doing, whether you agree with it or not. That way, you can say I want to stay here or change it. Um, I'm leaning that if I do change this, I would probably say where do we want to be, because we're kind of piggybacking on the Star Wars game for the D6. Where are we on the Star Wars side for this, for what we want to consider as our base weapon? And then we want to figure out where do we want to go on the other ones. Now, here's where things get tricky, and please keep this in mind. When we talk about just like phaser banks, okay, that might just be one cannon, but it's a bank of batteries to charge up for it. Now, when we have an array, because quite often in reading some of the tech manuals, they talk about how it's really a bunch of phaser array or phaser banks kind of all slaved together in order to do this. So the damage might be up a little bit. So we have to think about it in that regard, because if I'm looking at it in a Star Wars-ish view, if I have multiple weapons firing at the same time and they're fire linked, then I get to add an extra amount of damage depending on how many we have. So if I have one laser cannon of whatever and I add another laser cannon of that, then I actually increase it by 1D. So if it was like a 3D damage typically, and I add a second one, now we're up to 4. Same thing could be said if we have the phaser array and it's saying it's using so many banks. So there is a little offset here. Okay. Um, I'm throwing that out there because this is something that we may want to think about, because what you're doing is you're storing up all that extra energy. Now, here's the other thing to think of, and I'm throwing this out. We only have a fire rate of 1 in comparison to, like, I think it was a saber class I grabbed, and that had the 60 damage, I believe, but it had a fire rate of 3. So it might have a lower damage per fire because it can shoot 3 times in a round. So uh, just playing back and forth on that thought. So just bear with me on this. It may not be all that bad because this only has that single shot going out in a round compared to 3. And that might be why this is a little bit more damage. It's some of those things that you have to kind of play out. So I'm just letting my thoughts be known here. Okay, we also have photon torpedo launcher. Let's see, that is only just the one. It's forward, crew of 1, starfighter scale. Again, fire control is a 0D plus 2. We have a spread of 4, so we can shoot 4 torpedoes at one time, and we have 10D damage. Now, again, I want to say I thought that was higher than what we were doing on our capital scale, more than just 2D. So something says it's a little off here. Maybe I'm thinking wrong. Maybe I'm not. I'm just, like I said, I'm throwing it out here because I want to keep things mashing up here. Um, so that's where I'm going. All right. So we also have class gamma tractor beams. So that's going to be able to try and um, help us move containers or another ship or whatever. Um, we do have a fire control of 0D plus 2 and a strength of 9D. So that's pretty resilient there. We do have crew quarters listed. We have 30 Spartan, 10 basic, 4 expanded, and we have 3 decks on board. So each deck is roughly about 5 meters. Now, that does kind of make some sense because quite often they talk about in Star Trek, in one, I believe in the Decipher book, they mention it's not just the deck itself, but quite often we see like subfloors for trying to do like there's crawl space in between the subfloors, so that way they can work on whatever they need to do for water piping, electrical, and all the other stuff. So just throwing that out there. We do have 20 escape pods. Each escape pod has the capacity for 4 beams, and this was commissioned in roughly 2365 by Earth Reckoning. We do have 3 transporter rooms. Each room has a 6-person pad. There's also 3 emergency transporters, which has a capacity for 12 persons, and 1 cargo transporter for 400 kilograms. And we also have a complement of 2 shuttlecraft on board and 20 probes. Now, the write up we have here, which I think is going to mimic what we had before, the Yorkshire class was a type of Federation colonial transport starship in service in Starfleet in the late 24th century. The reference is the Star Trek Encyclopedia. In 2368, of this class, or a member of this class, the USS Denver, was transporting 500 colonists when it struck a Cardassian gravimetric mine. This is the Next Generation episode Ethics. Star Trek reference, the Star Trek Encyclopedia here. And that's coming from Memory Beta, which I think is where we got our ship from. Um, it's an interesting ship, and here again, it's a transport ship, so we don't have a large crew. This would be a wonderful ship in some regards to say we can have essentially a nice small group of guys around a table playing as the crew for this, only needing a crew of four. Maybe even if you have like six people or whatever, you could still kind of cram them in there and make it work. Uh, the other interesting thing is when you look at the ship itself, because we're all the way up here, and you look at how the windows are done up, it looks like it was meant to be a larger ship, but this is the size and everything else that we got on it. And I do find that quite often with Star Trek. There's times where I count the decks that it looks to me by the windows and the spacing and all that, and I'm counting a smaller looking ship than what it actually turns out to be. You know, sometimes I think we ask the artist that makes the models to make a ship look a certain way, and when we actually put it out there, we write up stats for something else. Um, and I think quite often it's done by accident. I don't think that they intended it to be that way on purpose. I think it's just a complete accident. Thinking it's going to be a grand ship, and here it turns out to be a gap between a shuttlecraft and a starship. Um, and in this case, it's a transport ship. So, you know, things just kind of work out the way they are. Um, but it's an interesting ship, not an overly large ship, but it is an interesting ship. It doesn't have our standard look like a Federation ship because it's more of a boxier ship and all that. But it still gives us that flexibility to say, hey, there are plenty of other ships out there. And like I said before, quite often we end up having a larger selection of Federation ships because most of the time we're centered on the Federation in comparison to the Klingons, Romulans, and all that. Although I will say with the Klingons and the Romulans, because we interact with them a little bit more, we've seen more varieties of ships. So with that, I think we'll end it here. I hope you have a wonderful day. I want to thank you for stopping by. It's always wonderful having you stop by and see what ship or what we're doing for the day. We'll see you in the next video.